Ha ha ha! Looks like we have a special guest on the Apostle P channel tonight. Is it from the sharpening bench? Well, sorta. Is it a guest blade? Nope. You guessed it. This is my Hinderer XM-18 3.5-inch Skinner non-flipper. I think I owe you guys an explanation. Stick around. Hi gang, Rob here. It is the evening of 22 February 2015, and yes, before the Apostle P camera this evening is my very own first Hinderer knife. And of course, let's dispatch with the formalities. It comes in a corrugated cardboard box, and it has a plastic sleeve and tactical peanuts. Okay, all right. I did buy this knife used on the Cove from a guy who I believe subscribes to my channel, and it is the 2014 release XM-18 Skinner blade, which is I guess the newest blade shape for the XM-18. And you guys can reference my video that's, I don't know, a little over a year old for my general impressions about the Hinderer knife when I had One All's Pub's blade in for a guest review. I've wanted one ever since, and it's kind of uncharacteristically desirable to me. Can you guess why? Uncharacteristically desirable? Yeah, blade stock a little over 4 millimeters and not thin behind the edge. That secondary bevel is at 18 degrees per side. Fairly okay at the base, about 30 thousandths thick. As we get to the tip, see that bevel broadens. Well, you can see it with your own eyes. How thick do you figure that is behind the tip, or behind the edge? Approaching 60 thousandths, I figure. Kind of funny, I think two of the blade shapes, blade styles on the XM-18 are called Skinner and Slicer. I don't know what you would skin with this, perhaps a rhinoceros. As a hunter, I generally prefer something a little more svelte to take a deer hide or rabbit skin off. But okay, if Rick wants to call it a Skinner, we'll call it a Skinner. I call it a manhole cover lifter. But having said that, it is an exquisitely constructed knife. Nearly a free dropper. I could make it a free dropper if I tweak that screw just a little. But look how it flies out of the handle. Very reminiscent of a zero tolerance ZT-0550, frankly. Just touch the stud. Out she comes. I'm going to sweep it open. We can do that. Smooth as glass. Okay, let's run over some specifications. The blade in this 3.5-inch Hinderer XM-18 is actually 3 9/16 inches long. Handle 4 3/4 inches, so not a horrible blade to handle ratio. Overall length 8 3/16. Handle thickness is about 530 thousandths. Blade stock thickness is about 163, a little over 4 millimeters. It's not a very broad blade. It kind of looks more broad than it is. When you see it in person, it's pretty narrow in this dimension, which means this flat grind from about 2/3 of the breadth of the blade down is pretty abrupt. It's about 12 degrees inclusive, about 6 degrees per side. And as I said, not thin behind the edge. As you guys know, this is generation 4 of the knife, which means the closed stop pin is sort of in a normal location instead of being back here. They used to put the closed stop pin so it contacted the forward finger choil about right here. Now it contacts the flipper. But there's no flipper, is there? And you guys also probably know this Teflon washer suspended knife in generation 4 only comes with a flipper so far. Well, that tells us something, doesn't it? It tells us that this flipper has been removed aftermarket. I did this because I really don't like flippers. You'll notice that the modified area is not stone washed like the rest of the blade. It's got a 320 grit satin, and unless you were looking for it, you really wouldn't notice it. I think I did a pretty good job contouring. If you notice, the forward finger choil sticks out just a little bit from the scales in the frame. So it sort of has to blend back in, and it becomes flush in this area, and then like production Hinderer non-flippers, the blade tang just drops below the surface of the frame right at its point. I rounded the point over nicely to kind of match the contour of the finger guard. It is completely comfortable. And here was my thinking. I've really wanted to buy an XM-18 slicer non-flipper, and I've wanted that for a couple of years. And when the Skinner blade came out, I was all over it. I just think it's beautiful. A little bit of a harpoon, a little omnumzon thing going on, a little almost Benchmade 940 modified reverse tanto. I don't know if I'd call this blade a Skinner. I don't know. Anyway, here's why I like this better than the slicer, because if you guys are familiar with the slicer, you know that the flat comes down almost to here, and then it sort of goes diagonally up and becomes a full flat grind through the belly. I'm sort of used to knives that thicken at the tip and do their best fine cutting back in this area. So I like the Skinner profile because the knife blade is the thinnest behind the cutting edge back here. Not so with the slicer. However, you guys know me well enough to know I'd like this blade to be considerably thinner behind the cutting edge. However, that said, with a good edge on it, let's see if it cuts. It does. Not bad. A little thick. S-curves are not easy. I've actually cut up a fair amount of cardboard with this knife since tweaking it, sharpening it last night. I think it's about as good as it can be. Also, thank you to John from One All's Pub for being my lifeline today in my Hinderer tuning efforts. Some of you know the Generation 4 XM-18s after Rick has endured years of ridicule in knife forums and online discussions about how bad the XM-18s flip and their weak detents. Well, I think he's sort of gone overboard. This knife had a ridiculous detent, which I guess was pretty good for flipping, especially right-handed. You know, if you're flipping a knife right-handed, you really don't have any pressure on the lock bar, so it has to kind of do everything. If you're flipping left-handed, generally you do have some pressure on the lock bar, so you don't need an insane detent because your thumb sort of helps in that regard. So if you make the knife non-flipper and you've got a lot of lock bar tension and a very protrusive detent ball, it almost makes the thumb stud possible to get with the right thumb. Now, as this knife sits, it's not as hard as I'm making it look, but before I tuned it, it did this to my right thumb. Because if you're opening it thumb stud with the right hand, these fingers are probably pressing on the lock bar, pressing the ball into the hole, making that detent pretty hard to get, like that. Left-handed, on the other hand, out it comes because you're not pressing on the lock bar. Basically, you've got a detent ball on these knives that is sticking out of the lock bar almost to its equator. So you're almost locking the knife blade in if you're pressing on that lock bar while you're trying to open it. I'm going to have to let my right thumb heal before I can show you how easy it is right-handed, because it's much better now. I took a little bit of tension off the lock bar, because after disassembly I was getting a little bit of lock stick, which is uncharacteristic for a Hinderer. Again, these knives are coming from the factory with more lock bar tension, more detent. So I backed the tension off the lock bar just a little. I'm getting no stick, and I'm getting deployment like a ZT-0550, which is maybe the fastest, most effortless thumb stud deploying knife for having no ball bearings I've ever had in my hand. This really, if I had my eyes closed, I think it was a 550. And that is a huge compliment to this knife. Oh, by the way, there is no up and down play. There is no side to side play. Even if I come down to the detent ball, there's nothing. Smooth, fast, centered, built like a Hinderer, guys. And I really love the ergos of this knife. Here we are in a normal saber grip. Jimping, purposeful but not painful. It's in the right place. Now let's go to reverse grip. Oh, everything beautiful. The thumb just rests naturally on that little flat. Bit of a draw cut grip. And now here's where we start to get into why I did what I did. Right now that knife is perfectly comfortable. The finger guard just resting against the web between my thumb and forefinger. Super comfortable. I mean super comfortable. But what if the flipper was there? It'd be poking right into the web of my hand uncomfortably. And let's see, in this sort of draw cut grip that you might use to rip open an abdominal cavity, or maybe break some twine or some nylon strap ties. It's super comfortable. Not sure it would be as much so with the flipper there, but here's the real deal. We've got a great forward choil on the XM-18, and when you grip that knife in the forward position, whether you leave your thumb back on the jimping or whether you come forward into the swale, which that swale is just a thing of beauty in the Skinner, especially if you were going to skin with it. But where would the flipper go? You know, this is how the hand wants to be on this knife. There's no room for a flipper. If you have a flipper on the XM-18, it forces the index finger forward onto the corner of the base of the edge and the middle finger back, and you feel it. Every move you make, you feel that flipper digging into those two fingers. Now, it is nothing but money. I mean, oh gosh. And you know, for me, I'm a thumb stud or spidey hole guy. I believe if I draw this knife out of my pocket, let's assume the clip wasn't on the wrong side for me. It comes out of pocket, it lays loosely in my hand, and bang. I'm actually in a position without even adjusting the knife in my hand. If I had to go into action in a knife fight, heaven forbid, I could do something from here, right? Doesn't take much to be there. If I pull the knife out of my pocket and orient it like this and flip it, assuming there was a flipper there, I can't do much of anything from there except drop the knife. I've got to really regrip in a major way. And you guys know I'm not like other guys. I really have very little use for flippers. In a knife that you're going to use, I think the thumb stud deployment is equally fast and puts your knife in a much more natural position to use it. And generally flippers get in the way. They either get in the way when you're gripping the knife, or they get in the way when they stick out to here and you have the knife in pocket, or they get in the way when the knife is open, hanging down to here, and you're trying to cut something. I don't know if you can see this, but right now there is belly touching and finger guard touching. If this knife had a flipper, the knife would be way up here like this, or if you're holding it in any kind of a horizontal grip, it just gets in the way. You don't need any more finger guard than this knife affords, so having the flipper tab hanging down another 3/8 of an inch gives you nothing. I'm very, very happy with this modification. It is the first one I've ever done. John at One Alls asked me, "Are you going to send that to Randy Johnson, Solo's Knife Reviews, for his flipper mod?" And I said, no, I'm not. If I do it, I'm doing it. And if I have to buy a blade, I'll buy a blade. I think it came out awesome. So what did I have to do to tune this Hinderer? And I am not a Hinderer whisperer. One Alls Pub is a Hinderer whisperer. Randy's probably a Hinderer whisperer. So I had to consult with John quite a bit. And what I did, I actually reduced the lock bar tension by taking the stabilizer out and bending it back. So as this knife came, the lock bar would almost touch, well, it would touch the far liner, and now it won't quite do that. It comes just past the middle of the blade, which is plenty of tension and no stick. I was getting a little stick after I reassembled the knife after sharpening and cleaning. Now I just get, sometimes I get just the slightest bit, but rarely. And I had a clean lock face, guys, and it's carbidized. Don't ask me to explain it, but it was there. There's really only one knife I know of that can operate with an insane amount of lock bar tension and not develop much, if any, stick, and that's a Sebenza. Their process for hardening the lock face on that titanium lock bar is different than anybody else's. They carburize it instead of carbidize or carbide plate. It's smoother, it's harder, closer to the hardness of the steel, I think, and it's not chunky, so you don't get stick. Or at least if you do, it's sort of that hydraulic silent stick. In a Hinderer or other knives that use carbidized lock faces or nothing at all, sometimes you just have to play with lock bar tension a little bit, and that was the case with this one. I was not able to push the detent ball into the lock bar farther. I actually tried to use a C-clamp and measure carefully how far it stuck out, but it just put dimples in the end of my C-clamp and didn't move. So it is where it is. The adjustments that I did for detent strength and lock bar tension just came by adjusting the lock bar. So, and here's kind of what we've got. Still have a plenty safe blade. There we go. You can shake it out if you try really hard. It's definitely retained safely. Plenty of detent for an adequate amount of thumb pressure to make the blade fly out with very little effort. Came out great. Loving it. My only complaint is the overly thick blade. But it does what it does. It's okay. It's a keeper, and I think I might have an OD green scale and some heat anodized bronze hardware coming. This, by the way, is wearing the new black and green G10 coloration, and it looks mostly black. You can, if you're paying attention, you can see the green in it, but it's mostly black. Not super attractive, by the way. So finally I have joined the herd, and I'm happy I did. I've admired these knives for afar. The secondary market prices for them have come back to earth. You can actually buy this knife now for under $500. You know, dangerously close to its original MSRP on the used market now. And I look for that to continue to improve as Rick gets his new factory rolling. Maybe production numbers will increase and we won't have to pay over MSRP for a used knife anymore. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Well, guys, I just thought you'd like to see this, and I'll keep you posted as my Hinderer learning curve progresses, and I'll let you know how this knife holds up. That's all for tonight. Grace to you and peace, my friends, from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember the Word and my XM-18 are sharp.